football analyst, fantasy football analyst from Yahoo Sports, and also the creator of the Reception Perception. One Matt Harmon joining us, fresh off of his Super Bowl week in Las Vegas, where he talked to Stefon Diggs, among others, out there on his program. Matt, thanks for joining us, because we want to dive headlong into Buffalo's receiver situation here in the offseason. But I guess my first question to you, I know you have a good rapport with Stefon, and he's obviously pitching his stuff, but you got him on there. And what would you say was your biggest takeaway from your conversation with him last week?
You're right. I've known Stefon for years. We've done shows together. We've spoken many times over the years. So yeah, have a great rapport with him. Based on really first time we met was actually talking about reception perception with him. So he's been aware of the methodology's affinity for him for quite some time, and we've developed a good rapport because of that. I will say the one big takeaway I had talking to him was guy was in a lot better spirits this year than he was this time last year, because we actually had him on the program with Austin Eckler at the Super Bowl in Phoenix. And I felt like coming out of that conversation that he was, again, a year ago, it just wasn't quite the same, vibe that I usually get from him. And it wasn't quite the same like dynamic conversation that you're usually going to get out of Stefon Diggs when he's at, kind of 100% or whatever. I came away from this conversation feeling like the guy, for whatever reason, I have no idea, it was in a bit of a better headspace this year than he probably was 365 days ago. Take that for whatever it is. My expertise is probably not in armchair psychology, but that was just one thing I felt kind of talking to him this year.
Yeah, I agree. That's what struck me about it when I listened to the conversation. He seemed upbeat and ready to keep going. And he also had, he kind of what we thought here on our show, the reasons for his drop-off in production at the end of the season, there was no simple answer. There was a ton of it. Like, he was being a good teammate. It was a new offensive coordinator. There's a lot of stuff going on. Is that what you kind of took away from that conversation as well?
Yeah, because of the format of the show that we were doing there in Vegas, we kind of had like a gamified effect to it. You guys saw it if people can find the video on YouTube as well. It was what's in the cards. You get an easy question if you answer the card game right. You get a hard question if you answer it wrong. We're getting there towards the end of the interview, and he's gotten himself a lot of easy questions because he keeps guessing correctly. And I'm like, dang it, we got to get some hard questions in here for Stefon Diggs. So luckily, right there towards the end, I was able to ask him about why did he feel like his production dropped off. And I agree with you guys. That was my first takeaway as well, was he listed off a variety of reasons. And I often think in these situations when we have a verified, in my opinion, elite player at the position not producing up to the typical expectations. And that's the crazy thing. Is like, I've seen over the course of studying receiver play for the better part of the last decade here, you see guys come and go. Obviously, you see guys decline season over season. I can't remember very many instances where a guy just loses it in the middle of a season, where he goes from having, in his words, what he thought was probably on pace to have the best statistical season of his career. He was aiming, he told me, for 1,800 yards this season. And he was on that trajectory, right? Like, he was up there with a guy like Tyreek Hill in the start of the season. For him to completely fall off in the back half, I'm with you guys that usually there's no easy explanation. There's no like one size fits all, excuse or reason or whatever. And I think that's fitting for the season that the Bills had. They change offensive coordinators. They change really offensive philosophies really in a lot of ways in the middle of the season. So, beyond anything that was going on with him individually, I think there was a lot of stuff really there that, I don't think Joe Brady came into getting the offensive coordinator job and the first thing he said is, all right, I got to get Stefon Diggs out of this offense. I got to start scheming him out of the offense or anything like that. That's not what any good coach would do. But I think they really tried to commit to the running game, and I think that was a successful thing. It was one of the first things that Diggs said, is that, we were running the ball really well. And obviously, like you guys said, he's trying to be a good teammate and fall in line with that.
All right, so let's spin it forward to the offseason to-do list for Brandon Beane, because he's going to probably have to restock this receiving room, in multiple ways, not just one way. As we know, most GMs have to look to all avenues to add to the room. And we know that Trent Sherfield is a free agent, did not really pan out all that well in the 1 year that he was here, really had trouble finding his way onto the field. Gabe Davis is a free agent who, despite the fact that he had 7 games this season with 1 reception or less, is probably going to command a price on the free agent market that the Bills, with their cap situation, probably cannot afford. So with all that in mind, the general consensus here is they're going to need cheap labor with their prohibitive cap situation. You know, they're going to become cap compliant before they get to March 13th, but they're not going to be able to swing big in the free agent market. Maybe you get a Kendrick Bourne type for $5 or $6 million a year, but beyond that, you know, you're not looking at anybody more important than that. So we're kind of thinking you got to get at least 2 in the draft here, and it's a good year for receiver talent, but you may have to get those 2 before you're out of the 4th round.
Yeah, I think that the Bills, when they've had Stefon Diggs there, and I don't blame them for this because, like I said, in my opinion, Diggs has been top 5 receiver since he's played. I thought he was a top 5 receiver in the league before he got to Buffalo, and he's definitely played and produced up to the level of a top 5 receiver when he's been a member of the Buffalo Bills. So I don't blame them for sort of trying to piece things together around him. I think just even regardless of the way his season ended from a production standpoint, I think you're at a point in his career, and I think you're at a point in where the offense is right now, where you can't really band-aid things around him anymore. I think you have to start really throwing resources at that second and third receiver spot. Now, for me, for my money, I really do like Khalil Shakir. I think he's a building block player for them. I was a fan of his coming into the league when he was playing at Boise State. I really like the way he functions as a route runner against man and zone coverage. I like his contact balance after the catch. I think you could see even more of him going forward in that area. You know, that's a guy that I think you can rely on to be potentially your third receiver. Maybe even if you take more of a developmental rookie, he can be your second most targeted wide receiver after Diggs. You know, again, provided that Diggs is on the roster. I expect him to be on the roster. That's my view of it. But, you know, again, I think he was a guy that's sort of open to anything because the Bills have a really tough cap situation, and there's all that kind of smoke in the media. So existing in that world right now where Diggs is on the roster, I think Shakir's a guy that can be your second or third receiver. But I'm with you guys that you're not going to be able to go out there and get a big free agent. Like, regardless of their cap situation, number 1 or really even like high quality number 2 receivers don't hit the open market very often. I mean, you're looking at guys like Christian Kirk, you're looking at guys like Jacoby Myers, 2 guys I think that are very good players, and 2 guys, frankly, that would have helped the Buffalo Bills the last couple of years. But you're not going to get somebody, you know, that's like, I don't realistically think a Mike Evans is hitting the roster, a Michael Pittman is hitting the open market, hitting T. Higgins. I don't think these guys are hitting the open market necessarily. So you got to look to the draft, and I think that might require them to be aggressive in a trade-up situation. This is a great receiver class. From what I've looked at so far, a consensus view is it's a great receiver class. So this is the year to do it. But I'm with you. It might take 2 bites at the apple there, depending on how they view Shakir. Like I said, I'm a fan. I think they can be that's a guy they can build around, but they definitely need someone to play on the outside, someone to really be a true separator, which I think was probably the weakness in Gabe Davis's game the last couple of seasons. Is that
one of the things I'm looking at? There's like 75 guys, 75 free agents on a list, for wide receiver in the league, and they go from Gabe Davis and Mike Evans all the way down through. And one of the things that I look at when you see these guys, and they're all different ages, and they all got these different attributes. Some of them had good seasons. Some of them didn't play in all 17 games. Some of them, one of the things I look at is snap count. So you get a guy like Mike Evans. He's got like 800 snaps. And I think Gabe Davis may lead this entire free agent market with over 900 snaps on offense. A guy who plays a lot means there's a lot of trust in him with that coaching staff that he's on. And whether they're productive or not, Gabe Davis falls kind of into that thing. The coaches put him on the field all the time. And that says a lot about where these free agents are. So regardless of their production or what they look like, snaps on the field are one of the things I look at as being one of the ways that you get what that guy's like off the field, because they put him on the field because they trust him.
100%. And Gabe Davis is a good player to mention there because, like you said, there were times that he was completely uninvolved from a production standpoint. Now, production doesn't tell the whole story of what a wide receiver is doing, of course, even when we're just talking about like running routes and getting open. But from a blocking standpoint, that Gabe Davis was a huge asset as a guy that they could stick on the line of scrimmage as an X receiver to set the tone as a blocker. And especially when they're running the ball really well in the second half of the season, Gabe was a big function of that. So that is definitely something that they'll have to push and pull if they do lose Gabe Davis and they replace him with a rookie wide receiver or, maybe someone that they think is going to give them some more consistent separation. are you losing something there from a reliability, from a run blocking standpoint when you became a better rushing team in the second half of last season? That will be the push and pull of that kind of equation there.
Yeah, because, I mean, as I see it, you kind of need that alpha male early, a guy that can grow into the number one role maybe a year from now. You know, maybe going into the 25 season, the guy's ready to take the number one mantle from a Steph Diggs. And then secondarily, you need a field stretcher. I mean, that's the second guy that they should probably get so they can try to pull some of these defenses out of that cover two shell that they see every week. So that's why I'm kind of a proponent of getting two in the draft. My question to you, though, Matt, is winning against man coverage and catch rate are two things that have not been in plentiful supply at the receiver position on this roster. Now, obviously, Shakir helped immeasurably in the catch rate area. But in terms of winning, you know, and getting consistent separation, as you already mentioned, Gabe Davis struggled in that area. Some of the other receivers on this roster struggled in that area, Sherfield being one of them, Hardy being another, who they lined up outside, and at 5'6", I thought that was a big ask for him. But maybe just tell me where you kind of come down on that, and what is, if there is any translation, because I'm tapping into your reception perception knowledge here, but catch rate and separation rate, like how do they translate to production on the whole at that position?
Yeah, we've found that success rate versus man coverage, which is the main metric, along with success rate versus zone and press and a variety of other things that I track, that I've been tracking with reception perception over the last 10 years, since 2014. So 10 years worth of data essentially there. That success rate versus man is one of the biggest predictors of production, of future production. When we're looking at guys that come into the league in their first and second season, these guys that show early on that they can beat man coverage and are going to line up as outside receivers, those are typically the players that go on to become the stars of today and tomorrow, or at least very high quality productive players. There's been a few guys throughout, again, reception perception history since 2014 that beat man coverage at a high rate that don't go on to succeed in the NFL. But the guys that are completely busted out are very few and far in between. We're talking about like maybe Anthony Miller. He was the guy that I really liked as a man coverage beater back in the 2018 NFL draft class. That he never really panned out into being a successful player. But like on the lower end of it, you're looking at guys like, okay, Sterling Shepard, a guy that has been a reliable player for a long time, but couldn't stay healthy. That's like what we're talking about in terms of guys who aren't stars, but are solid NFL players. So that, if you're going to be an outside receiver, I do think the ability to beat man coverage is the most important trait. However, if you're going to be one of these off-ball flanker receivers, or certainly you're going to be a slot receiver, our research also shows, and there is if people are interested, there's an article on receptionperception.com done by Josh Scott, who is a data scientist in his day job, kind of showing the correlations here between where receivers line up and the coverages that are more important for them to beat. If you're going to be that slot receiver, it's more important for you to beat zone coverage. Not that as an outside receiver, it's not important for you to beat zone coverage, but just where these guys line up, the different coverages they're going to face, that kind of is the catch-all thing there. But yeah, it is a very good predictor of future production. And that goes for guys that show at the college level that they can separate against man coverage too. They get not as clean as once you get them in the NFL. That's the best place to test these guys. That's the best reception perception data you are going to get. But regardless, again, if you can beat man coverage, in my opinion, that's a really good sign for who you're going to be as a player down the line.
Have you done any stuff on the draft class coming out? And if you have, how deep is it? And what are your thoughts?
Yeah, so typically I don't start my draft prep with these guys until after I do the free agent receivers, because that's the first group I drop on receptionperception.com in March. However, this year everybody's telling me, oh, this is a great receiver draft class. You're going to love it. And I couldn't help myself, as if we didn't do enough work during the regular season. Let's start doing college receivers right away. So I have looked at some of the top prospects in this year's class, the top kind of 4 consensus guys: Marvin Harrison Jr., Malik Neighbors, Rome Odunze, Brian Thomas, and I've looked at a few other guys there as well: Lad McConkey, Keon Coleman, some of the names I've started working on. I think that Rome Odunze and Neighbors and Marvin Harrison are all worth the hype. I'm especially high on Rome Odunze. Not that I'm not high on those other 2 guys. I obviously am, but the one guy who I didn't have as much expectations for it because I've heard about Marvin Harrison, forever and how exciting he is as a prospect. I didn't really know much about Rome Odunze. Didn't watch a lot of Pac-12 football. Gonna watch a lot of college football in general. I got a whole NFL to worry about. So I didn't really know much about the guy. I go in and I've been just blown away by how impressive he is off the line of scrimmage, how impressive he is as a route runner, in addition to what he does in the contested catch game. So, those are just the guys at the top, and I think they're really impressive. But, Brian Thomas might be a good name to bring up for the Bills as kind of a guy that might be able to do a little bit of what we were saying, where somebody that can win vertically, but who can play outside and separate against man coverage. I think Brian Thomas is sort of maybe not in the same class as those top three, but somebody that might go in that middle of first round range if Buffalo's trying to trade up. That's the type of guy that they should be targeting.
Yeah, he's a hard guy to ignore when he leads the FBS with 17 touchdown receptions playing in the SEC. So, yeah, I get where you're coming from on that. It's interesting to me because Brandon Beane always says, look, we try to fill as many holes as we can in free agency, so we're not leaning towards positional need by the time we get to the draft because that can lead to problems and reaches and all of those kinds of things. I just think they're at a point now where there has to be a youth movement on this roster, and not just at receiver, all over the place, but at receiver too, because it's an expensive position. They need cheap labor there, which is why I think when all is said and done, they may add one veteran in free agency at an affordable price, but when it's all said and done, they probably have to add two, and they have 10 draft picks to work with here.
Yeah, I think they might end up adding two. There are free agents, though, like Kendrick Bourne, you mentioned, is a really nice name. I've always been a big fan of Curtis Samuel, and he has some ties to Carolina. We know that this coaching staff and front office has ties to Carolina as well. I'm not sure how far back those connective tissues go. I think there probably some overlap there. But, again, he's a guy that's played in Carolina. There's some familiarity there, and like – Steve, to your point about being on the field and reliability, that's not necessarily Curtis Samuel's strength. He's been a guy who's dealt with injuries at times, but he can do a little bit of the vertical speed stuff where he can also be a guy that can win sort of in designed ways. There might be a little bit overlap with Shakir there, but I think there's more to Curtis Samuel's game in terms of being the ability to beat man coverage on the outside. I've always been a big fan of him in that way. So maybe you add like a veteran sort of discount guy. Like, we're not shooting at the top of the market here for Buffalo. I'm with you. I think they need some cheaper guys there, but maybe a Samuel or a Kendrick Bourne. I mean, even like a Josh Reynolds type, maybe not a superstar going to knock your socks off type, but then you maybe make one or two bigger moves in the draft to go along with hopeful development from Dalton Kincaid. And then we're talking about an offense that can hurt you in a variety of different ways.
Good stuff, Matt. Appreciate it. Thanks for taking some time. It's great to get cross paths with you. Hope we can do it again.
Absolutely. Always love talking about this receiver core in particular. Thank you guys for having me.